morning, everyone, and welcome to this Indica Books Writers Workshop. My name is Abhinav. I'm your host, and we have with us Otis and writers who've submitted their pieces for feedback and discussion. And you can head over to the Indica Books channel at Twitter at handle at Indica Books, or you can join us on our Facebook group at Indica Book Club. The intent is to use this series of sessions that are held on every Sunday at 8 p.m. India time to essentially allow and provide a platform for writers who want to improve the craft and get feedback on the writing process and the different aspects of writing in this session. So there is a channel on YouTube also where we have more than 80 plus videos of previous sessions starting right from 2020. So with that, I will turn this over to you, Otis.
Okay. Is my audio better than Abhinav's? Okay, good. Sweta, let's talk about your piece to start with.
Okay.
So, yeah, tell us a little bit about what you're working on.
So it was very exciting for me because Indica had put out an application saying that they were looking at people to study polytheistic traditions across the globe, and you could take any one geography and do a research project. So it was originally a research project where the outcome would have been an academic research paper kind of a thing. So I was because I saw that Africa was mentioned among the geographies, and I was very keen on. In fact, I have actually published a book on which is set in Africa. It's called How the Eland Twisted Its Horns. It's a children's picture book. So I have been interested in Africa for quite some time, and I had African folk tales, and so I read Roots when I was like 10 or 11. So it's something that I was subject I was interested in. So I immediately applied for the fellowship and I got it. So Dr. Edward is heading the fellowship. So he said that instead of writing a research paper, why don't you write a middle grade fiction 50,000 word. Actually, originally he said young adult fiction 50,000 word book, which can be accessible to more viewers. And he had given the example of Akata Witch. So I picked up Akata Witch and I really liked it. And so I also gave a plan, but that plan was more so, as usual, there was a plotting defect. I knew there was a plotting defect. The plan was that there are two children, and they are in India. So India has this community of African descendants, and they're known as the Siddhis, and they live in Karnataka and in some parts of Maharashtra, but mostly in Karnataka. So the story plan that I had was that these two children who are from the Siddhi community, which is they want to find their African roots. So they start something called the Myth Finders Club, and they look for African myths. And and the thing is, the Siddhi community is related to the Bantu community in Africa. So for this, I'll have to do research on Bantu mythology. So I had given this as the basic plot, but again, it didn't have any of the good things that a plot would have. So Dr. Edward accepted it not as a young adult novel, but as a middle grade novel. I had a plot. I started plotting actually, and as one is supposed to do for properly. And I had a Yoruba a story in mind, which is the Ifa spirituality, which is well known. But I had a beginning where there was some destructive activity and a lot of those things. But before I could submit that, this project got approved. So this became a young adult novel. So I'm planning to read over 50 books on African traditional religion, and I'm just currently reading this wonderful book. It is by a Booker-winning author, Marlon James, and this is the SFF book that he has written, and it's really incredible. I finished Wole Soyinka's Of Africa, and then there is another book called Our Black Unconscious. So I'm doing extensive reading, and because the original project was a research project. So it's not just about having a children's writing goal, But what I realized was while I'm doing reading, it's not the same as writing. So, which is why I thought I'll start this month also with some writing goals. And I started with, so Anansi is a concept I've worked on before. So I had rewritten one of the Anansi folktales before, and that was on Anansi, how there were no stories in the world. And this is a real story folktale, whereas the story I have submitted is something I have written. But the original story is that there were no stories in the world, and Anansi goes to Naomi, who is the father sky, and asks for stories. And Naomi asks for the most dangerous creatures on the planet, and then Anansi procures them and gives them to Father Sky, and then he gets the stories on the planet. So that was the original story. This was something I just used Anansi as a protagonist, but I had not taken from the original folklore. So I'm also reading extensively African folklore. And so the subject is of deep interest to me. I'm really interested in Africa, but it is a vast subject, and there are so many topics under Africa. But the thing is, I'm enthusiastic. But I was when the project changed from being a research project to a middle grade or a YA novel, I was just scared about the plotting part, because I know that I've not yet learned it, or I've not worked on it, or I've not picked it up so far. So that was something I was very anxious about.
Okay. Well, so I think I'm understanding a little bit more. I didn't read the plotting diagram that you sent me so much. I just read the excerpt. Okay. So it sounds like so if you're writing, are you supposed to, do you think that your charge is to write a story that takes the folklore of Africa and then translates it into, what do you say, like a young adult style book?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that offers some problems, because like you have folklore, right? So you have a story that's like Aesop's fables. I know this story about Anansi already. And you have folklore, which kind of falls into two sides. Either the academic study of folklore, right? Which I've read some. So that's clearly adult, right? That's adult literature when you're talking about academic study of folklore. And then you have basically like a children's book, a very young children's book. It sounds like that you've already written something like that. So you have you have a book that's sort of for young children because your characters are animals, right? And in that way, they're sort of very archetypical, right? You know, they're very representative, and the stories themselves are representative of I don't want to say simple concepts, but you know, they're representative of sort of foundational concepts. And it kind of falls into those two sides, basically academic, you know, an academic consideration, or something that's, you know, quite young. So to hit something in the middle of those two, right? Something that's like, when I think of young adult fiction, I think of something that's more, basically I think of it as being more accessible than novels, right? So like a novel is maybe just considered a little less accessible, but not very much, right? Like, I mean, I can think of, you know, I read Crime and Punishment when I was a sophomore in high school. I don't think that was inaccessible as a sophomore in high school. So that's Dostoevsky. That's not Brothers Karamazov. Brothers Karamazov is inaccessible for me as a sophomore in high school, but Crime and Punishment is not. Jane Eyre, the Brontes, you know, those are all accessible for young adult. So young adult, I think I guess I would say now the modern idea of a young adult fiction is that you have young adults essentially as the central figures and protagonists of a story that deals with mature themes, absolutely, but essentially you have young adult protagonists and antagonists. So, I mean, like Oliver Twist would be young adult in its way. Catcher in the Rye is like maybe like the first young adult book, you know, maybe you could argue, right? So there's Catcher in the Rye, it's a central protagonist is an adolescent, and it's really all about that adolescent figure, you know? So I think that offers some problems, right? Because if you're writing about the folklore of Africa and you're using these animal characters, how do you make the animal characters, how do you raise the animal characters up to this sort of more complex young adult, where, I mean, you're really dealing with sort of really mature themes, love, death, sex, you know, you are dealing with mature themes in a young adult book. I mean, I'm not sure, you know, it's somewhat, I don't really know fantasy, so I don't really know to what degree like something like Harry Potter deals with young adult themes. I mean, I don't know. But I do think you have a very, very interesting book. I like what you said about this region of India, where you have people living there who have African roots, and that they might be central characters, you know. And I like this idea of sort of like the myth club or something like that. That's interesting too. So I think that's something really interesting to work with. I don't know how that fits with this piece. I also see, I mean, so like I also see that this piece on Anansi, right? I see that Anansi could be a centralizing idea for an entire book, because Anansi is basically, so like trying to, you know, when you're dealing with folklore, which I do deal with because I'm interested in rhetoric and the development of rhetoric and the development of, you know, language and consciousness and all of these things. I'm very interested in that. So when I think of this story particularly, you basically, you have this, it's not anthropomorphizing. I mean, you're anthropomorphizing the animal, you know, the spider, but you're also basically trying to describe something in concrete terms through the metaphor, right? And the metaphor is the web, the spider's web, and what's perceived, right, by an oral culture who are talking, you know, and telling stories, is that there's a kind of web that gets created through stories. And that's perceived, except for it's intangible. So the way to make that idea tangible is that you talk about a spider, right, and a spider's web. And through that means you develop this idea of what storytelling is like. It creates this sense of interconnection between all of these various individual players. So you have individual players, but life is really the stories about the interactions between those players, right? So that, as an overarching frame, could be a book, because you have Anansi, right? You have Anansi who is maybe like put up forward, and we understand Anansi, and then Anansi becomes the teller of the stories of different players interacting, you know, basically protagonists and antagonists or antagonistic forces interacting in various kinds of stories, right? So there's a book my daughter, have you ever read Ray Bradbury? Is a science fiction writer.
Okay, no.
He wrote a book that I read when I was a kid called The Illustrated Man. And The Illustrated Man is this guy meets a traveler and they're like camping someplace. And the person that he meets has these tattoos all over his body. And it turns out they're talking and he's like, each tattoo is a story. And if you look at the tattoo comes to life and the story unfolds. So it's basically a little bit like this, it becomes a frame, and then the book is all of those stories. And then the last story is about this section of the man where there's no tattoo.
Okay.
And when he looks at that section, this person who's relaying all this sees his own story, which is that he's killed by the guy with the tattoos. So it's just, this framing, and with Anansi, you have the potential to create a frame like that. So you frame with Anansi, and then you can tell all the individual stories within it. That could be a book. Is it a book, in this idea of young adult fiction, as I think of it? I'm not sure. I'm not sure, again, if you're going to be, so like in your story, right? So we have here, you have Bear, right now you're not writing, to me, this is not young adult, this is younger children, So it's not, because when you're thinking about writing for young adults, you have to write about themes that are of concern to young adults. The concern here, the metaphysical concern of storytelling or consciousness, the things that we might deal with adults as like, when we look at folklore as adults, that's not really of concern to the young adult population, right? Or, what's happening with bear and chimpanzee and cat, that's also not really of concern to the young adult population. So you need to figure out how you write about the themes that young adults are concerned with. And young adults are concerned with themes having to do with the interaction with other young adults for the most part, right? So relationships, friendships, courtship, all of these various things. So, so there's some figuring out to do there. That's what I think, like to figure out exactly.
This is actually not a main story. So that I have to submit 50,000 words by December 1st. But I thought this month I will write one story set in Africa so that I just get the sense and the confidence to write about Africa and then plan the actual story. So that's why I started with the Anansi story. So this is just to write about Africa, and then after that I will know what are the gaps in my reading also, so I can take care of that, because now I realize that I need to understand the geography, the trees, the vegetation, the antelopes, all of that I need to understand better. So when I start writing, I'm aware of what are the loops in my writing. So I thought I'll just write this story this month, and maybe 20,000 words or something. It doesn't have to be published. Maybe I'll just put it on Pratham Story Weaver. And but the idea is that I, at least apart from the reading list, I also do some background writing so that I know if I'm writing about Africa, what are the problems I'm going to face. So that was the behind this story.
Well, I think that I would consider, this story then as maybe, I think you could just write it and have it function as a kind of introduction, like if the short story is an introduction that suggests in a way a structure to the book.
Okay.
And basically with the idea that stories are a web, right? That stories are a web with these various encounters, and that stories create a sense of the reality that we live in. I think that that's a compelling idea that could be very interesting in terms of a structure for the book, particularly if you're going to have a book with maybe discrete stories, like let's say you have 8 different stories about Africa within the book, then we could see sort of how these sort of interact and interweave. Like when I was, so I'm going to put up my note. So when I'm reading this story, I'm thinking of what it means. Like what is this metaphor about? And what is it saying about the nature of our perceived reality through stories? And it's basically saying that, to me, you know, it's not like I'm not thinking that the spider invented stories, but I'm also seeing that the spider's web is a natural manifestation of something that is real in terms of these interconnections and that end up being stories. So I was thinking of this initial story about the spider as basically putting forward a kind of meta structure that you can use in the formation of your book. And that is to recognize more exactly how stories are a web-like, you know, let the web metaphor inform you, and then use that as a kind of structure so that one thing that we'll take away from the book as a whole, and I think that this is the case, we read a book and we might learn a lot of different things, but basically a book is about one thing. And your book could be about this interconnectedness of these stories. So like I've made these little X's, but I was like, you have like 8 characters, let's say, you know, you have donkey, bear, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So then we have each of those characters has a trajectory that's their life, but they also have interactions with other characters that create new trajectories, right? So they have trajectories and they're moving in a certain way, and they're having these interactions with other animals or other people and people, or, you know, creating certain events that also branch out into new stories, right? And that is, to me, it's a compelling structure and a compelling thing to represent, and I think it could be useful. So I just throw that out there for you to think about.
Yeah. Actually, I had once written a story in which I had to write some 10,000 or 15,000 words. So I used, there is a mantra, Lalita Tripura Sundari mantra, which is just alphabets. So it goes Kai La Hreem Hasaka Hala Hreem Sakala Hreem. So that is 15 alphabets. So I use those 15 alphabets, and each of those, so 50, I made it 15 chapters. So Ka, A, La. So I'm used to using that. What I meant was that I've done it before, where I've had a structure in mind and then written the story to some sort of a shape. So
Right.
I am able to understand what you're saying, writing to a shape, or even biomimicry. So where the idea is that we imitate from nature and use it for creating structures. So that is something that will be very interesting. Web as a
Okay,
shape.
I didn't know that word biomimicry, but yes, that's exactly it, biomimicry. But it's not exactly biomimicry, because it's not. I mean, I guess depending on what mimicry means, but it's just that these structures are just true structures. That's all. You know, it's like it's true in the web and it's true of our stories. It's just, you know, these structures exist. So yeah, so that's great. Let me say about this piece, particularly if you do use it in this way, and I think it'd be worth rewriting it. I would. So in a sense, you write into this piece, But what happens is the thing I notice, we have the spider is talking to the other animals, but then he laughs loudly. He had just been born. So once we go, so this is me. You have to forgive me. I'm a tyrant. I'm a tyrant. I know, I understand. We just went backwards. Okay. So I'm going to very much encourage you to instead tell stories moving forward only. And I'm going to just try and illustrate. Again, it has to do with patterns. But writing is basically a linear activity, as is our life, right? We move forward, we imagine in time, right? We can think about different times, but we are basically always moving forward in time. So we're going like this. Language is also going like this. It's linear. We create more momentum for our reader when our language is moving in a linear way going forward, and the story is also going from beginning to middle to end, also moving forward. When our language is moving this way, but the reader, their consciousness is going this way some of the time, and then they start going backwards. Now it's weird, right? So this is a weird thing to do. This is a good thing to do. So I just encourage you to try and be chronological. So like, for example, you say that the spider was born from an egg, right? I would start there. I would start with, the earth was 2 years old, and underneath the tree, there was, I forget what color you said it was.
Red.
There was a red, there was what appeared to be a red stone, because no one knows it's an egg yet, right? Because it's not broken. What appeared to be a red stone. The animals looked at it. What is this red stone? It's so light, they said, right? They pushed it. They nosed it. They watched it. Then one day, it broke. And from the stone, right? So now the reader's understanding it's not a stone, it's an egg. A leg crawled out, and another, and another, and another. And they say 4 legs just like us, right? But then another leg came out, and another. What has 6 legs, 7 legs, 8 legs, right? So you can birth this spider, right? And that's the beginning. And then, right? So I would suggest trying to do that. The reason, again, is because when we're writing, what we're doing mainly is we're taking the reader and we're moving their consciousness, their thoughts in a certain way. We move it in that way with language, point by point. We want to take care of how we move the reader's consciousness, right? That is our main thing. We don't want it going, Abhinav and I, we grapple about this over and over again, switching points of view, but it's all the same thing. When we have their consciousness, when we drop them into the story, take care of it. Understand that every word you use does something to that consciousness, right? They're going forward step by step by step, and they're happily going down the path. And then suddenly you go, but 2 years ago, this happened. That has an effect. So just take care of that effect. But I think I love this story, and you have that wild imagination, to really invent it. I know that. So I look forward to seeing this story, and with maybe some attention to that idea of that sort of biomimicry, like to create a structure that'll be useful in this book that you write. Yeah, it sounds like a great project. I love Indica is just, you're doing so many wonderful things. I love the whole assignment that you're getting. that emphasis on polytheism. There's a great book if you're interested in reading about Africa. I have Burkina Faso. I have a friend from Burkina Faso who recommended to me this book. It's called The Fortunes of Wangrin. It's worth looking at. It's a wonderful book because it combines this sort of vision of Africa that includes this sort of the animism and the polytheism and the sort of encroaching colonialism, and it's a really fascinating book.
Okay. I'll definitely look at it because I have to read a lot of books, so I'll definitely read it. Fortunes of Wangrin.
Fortunes of Wangrin, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He, my friend says it's about, and I believe him, it's about his uncle. So it's quite a, I found it a very, I mean, insightful book, but also just, it was just a wonderful book. I loved it. Really good.
I'll definitely read it.
But there is also a rule. There's a rule by someone else. I have the book somewhere. But we as writers, we have to write. And this person writes, we're allowed. He says you're allowed to read 3 books as research, and that's it. Then you have to write. So I know the difficulty of getting lost in research because I love doing research. I mean, you read books and you think, and it's like it's like I don't know. It's our food, right? As writers, reading is our food. You know, it's how we sustain ourselves. But do be careful of getting lost in research. Make sure you get to the writing. Once you figure out your structure, you know, I think then you want to start delving into the characters that you're going to be writing about.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, I love the research. I love the intellectual part of it. But finally, and sometimes I have to delve into the intellectual part of it for a long time before I rediscover that what I really love is inventing the story. That's the main thing. Well, thank you for this. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. And thanks a lot for all your feedback during the Cambodia anthology, because I was actually able to identify genuine problems with my writing.
Oh, great. And what's happened with the Cambodian anthology? Is it
I think
moving along?
it's not edited now. I don't know what's happening. There's going to be a round 2. So I don't know what's happening with it actually.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I look forward to reading it.
Thank you so much.
Arun, shall we talk about your piece?
Hi. Hey, Otis. Hi. Good evening. Good morning.
Hey. Yeah. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Good. I'm a little confused that, you know, my hair is blonde, but it seems to just completely seem the same color as this white wall behind me. So other than that, I'm fine. I just
Otis,
don't understand some of these
Otis,
optics.
You have hair. You know, be kind to those who are follically challenged.
Okay, Arun, tell me a little bit about this. I think I perceived that you engaged, you know, from our last conversation, you engaged in a kind of experiment. So tell us a little bit about what you were experimenting with.
Let me tell you what this is about, right? So there is in my 3rd book of the trilogy, there is a huge battle that takes place. Okay, now including the setting up of the battle, I think I wrote, the battle extends for 12,000 or so words. Okay, and there are about 21 different or 20 different scenes in about 3 chapters. And so this extends, it's probably like 1/6 or 1/7 of my book itself. So this piece is just one small scene in that battle where a young prince is riding into battle. And I kind of wanted to experiment and show, you know, when you remember the last conversation, we were talking about how to get, all the senses going in a sense. So in my imagination, when a young man first going into battle, it's almost like time slows down and he's very keenly aware of every single thing. He's aware of the dust, of the sounds, of the faces, so I just wanted to kind of bring that piece out here, and that's what this is about.
Yeah, and I sense that. Yeah, and you're right, and I think that what you're saying about the senses corresponds to modern neurobiology. When we are activated, right, and we have adrenaline, we go into what some people describe as fast thinking. I don't know if you read much of this, but the book Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow.
I've read that.
Yeah. It can make you feel like it's designed to help people manipulate us. But anyway, we can be made to think fast, in which case we narrow our perception. We're in that sort of survival mode, and we're perceiving things within the frame very clearly, but we're also not perceiving anything outside the frame.
It's like when sportsmen say they are in the zone, right? Where it's got almost like a tunnel vision. They filter everything else out, but what's going on immediately near them. And that's kind of the feel I wanted to bring in.
Yeah, I read a lot about sports psychology too. Yes, absolutely. The zone is that sense of focus, but without the agitation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just you're completely integrated into your action, without judgment, without that. I mean, those aspects of like the past and the future are not there. Right, because you're focused only on the present. Without the past and the future, you have no judgment. Right. That's the zone. Right.
Yeah.
You're not worried about whether you're successful or not, because that's the future. You're not worried about what has happened in the past, because that's the past. You're just here. Oh, true. Boy, we love it. We love it when it happens.
And the other thing I wanted to do, Otis, was, I mean, there's a lot of repetition of the words, right? Noticed and heard. In my mind, I wanted a kind of rhythm to it. He's going on a horse. There's a certain cadence that translates even into the way maybe he's thinking. So I wanted to bring that cadence out through a rhythmic feel to it, and which is why I deliberately use the same words again and again.
Mm-hmm. So I appreciated the your movement to get this interiority in this experiment. So I think that was really good. So I'm just going to kind of add to it a little bit.
You can rip it apart if you want as well. You know that, Otis.
I'm not going to rip it apart. It's all a process. It's all a process.
Otis, I insist.
Oh yeah, of course, Abhinav will insist.
Wait, let's see. I'm having this to go. I'm going to stop my share for a second, and I'm going to reinstate it, because maybe that will allow something good to happen here. So it's here we go. So what I just drew this picture here. So I have this thing where I sometimes, so again, in writing, trying to move things around on my screen, so forgive me. In writing, we are dealing with the reader's consciousness that is formed by the words that they read, right? We need to handle a lot of different things, but with this linear pattern. That's really the biggest difficulty of our medium, our chosen medium, is that we don't have any ability to show things all at once, right? We only show things, if we think about the zone, and this is actually, speaking of the zone, this is the quality that I want to bring out in the reader. It's a way to say it. I sometimes say we want to grab the reader by the throat and not let them go. Well, what we want to do is we want to create this sense of zone in the reader so that they have this myopic focus on our work, word by word by word. And then they feel absolutely tied to the present moment of each unfolding word and not think about their past and not think about their future, not think about the fact that they're not doing their work, not think about the fact that they're not, they haven't done the laundry, not think about the argument that they had with so-and-so in the past. We don't want any of that to be involved. We want to get our reader into the zone. Mm-hmm. So we have this linear structure, word by word, and yet we do have to create a larger sense, a total experience of the world. What happens primarily in your work, because you're experimenting with it, is you drive us into the consciousness of your main character only, so that we're only in the thoughts, and it's not even really thoughts, but the feelings of that character, which is fine. You're accomplishing that, but the feelings of a character are essentially abstract. And the feelings, they're not as engaging, actually, to a reader as things that are more tangible. This is a little bit complicated, but obviously everything that we write, all our words are just symbols, right? They're symbols for other things. But when we write symbols that are for concrete things, they have more weight because they're concrete. And we write symbols for abstract things, they have less weight. We want, okay, I'll stop for a second. This is a story I sometimes tell. And when I was teaching down at Stanford, so I had a room with a table, it wasn't online, and I had a group of students in the continuing studies. And one of my students wrote a fabulous story about a boy, and he wrote a boy, from the boy's point of view, goes on this hike in Yosemite with his father. And they stop to camp, in the evening at this spot by a lake. But the boy really wants to go to this other place that's up beyond the cliff. And there's supposedly a meadow up there that he really wants to go to. And he begs his father to go up to this other cliff. And so the father finally relents, and they go up and they walk along this ridge, and the father falls and he dies. Incredible, right? The boy backtracks down to where his father's dead, and he makes his camp there. It's an unbelievable story. I'm absolutely riveted. In the night, we basically he's afraid, and his fear is this metaphor of a bear. And so it's sort of represented metaphorically as a bear. But we don't have a real bear. It's just this metaphor of a bear. So, it's a brilliant story, and I hope that student published this story. But I said to the class, okay, let me ask you a question. We're sitting here at this table. What grabs your attention more? If we put on this table, in the middle of the table, the metaphor of a bear or a real bear? Mm-hmm. We need real bears, right? Right. Not emotions, so we need to have a balance of that. So what I have here this structure that I have, this picture, so I basically call it the onion structure. So whatever. But you know, my kids took Suzuki violin, and my Suzuki violin teacher also talked about the peanut butter and jelly structure, right? So it's a piece of bread, some jelly, and then, you know, like a lot of music is actually structured this way. So it has something in the beginning. It's like beginning, middle, and end, right? A piece of bread here that you learn this piece, then you play this thing that's different, and then you return to the theme. And in fact, a lot of music is structured that way. It's basically like that. But it's a kind of structure that draws us from the exterior environment to the interior environment, and then out again to the exterior environment. And I basically see it as a structure that I like to apply. Does it apply to whole stories? I'm not sure, but I do think of it as a structure that applies to the paragraph, something of about a paragraph length. You've written, I wonder if I can mark here. Okay, I made a mark here in the middle. So you've written, you know, a number of paragraphs that are all in this interior space. And so what I'm lacking is the exterior environment in a way. I'm getting all of the characters' feelings, but I'm not getting the battle. I'm not getting the things that would really engage me. Yeah.
Can I interject here?
Yeah.
So like I said, the battle has some 20 odd scenes, right? So there's a lot of description of the actual battle happening.
Yeah, yeah.
And this interlude is one where I wanted to kind of make it different, because every other scene has battle happening. And I wanted to give that inner thoughts of a guy riding into battle for the first time. So I see what you're saying, but I'm asking you whether this structure where you go deep in and then come out, should it be at a scene level, or should it be at an overall, you know, in this case, the battle starts off where I show how, you know, the different groups are organized, different battles are going on, right? The left flank, the right flank, the center, there's the elephant, then there's the cavalry, there's the infantry. Yep. Now,
so let me stop you, Arun. So in the same way that these are just all ideas that you have to think about. How we always want to be thinking, see these lines, those arrows, that's moving the reader's consciousness. So we always want to be thinking about that. When you're talking about these other scenes, you know, we can have a fault by having it just be exterior, right? Just the exterior world without the interior world is basically like looking at pictures without any meaning. You know, the way we respond, basically the meaning of things is the way we emotionally respond to them. So we want to have both. You want to think about it. So just doing one and then doing the other, I'm not sure. What I like to do is I like to basically always be moving my reader in and out of these experiences. And let me just explain a little bit how I do it. And I want them to be in the point of view of the character, because the character is like an avatar for the reader's experience. We basically want to take the reader, put them into the character, and then have them be in the zone with the character.
So I've done that. So when I said that there are multiple scenes in this battle, each scene is shown from a character's perspective. So I've used the point of view in each scene, which is different.
Right. So now we're gonna add the exteriority and interiority. So that's where I'm leading. So as I see it, we can write sentences. So we're basically trying to write sensory experience. That's what we're writing. So the character, when we write point of view, we're writing the character perceiving the world. And the reader participates in that perception by being basically kind of inside the character.
Yeah.
We have to write in a linear fashion. In reality, we perceive the world through all of our senses. But we can't do that in writing because we have to do things one at a time. So I kind of, this is not rigid. It's fluid, but I think of, the exterior, the most objectifying sense is sight, right?
Right.
He saw the horse charging at him, its nostrils flaring, the most objective. He heard it snorting as it was upon him, and smelled the dung in which it slept at night. Okay. He thought, my God, I'm dead. He felt himself transported. He raised his sword against, right? So I'm going like this, right? I'm going, he saw the general horse, he saw the specific nostrils, right? He smelled, he felt the muscle upon him. He raised his sword and wedged it against the ground. Got
it.
That is taking the reader, and then I want to take them out again, and then get them back in touch with that objective world, so that the reader is having an experience in total like our actual experience. Because my actual experience is that I'm having all of these sensations, right? And I'm thinking things which are cognitive, and I'm feeling things which are not cognitive, right? And I'm trying to represent that in this linear pattern. So I come up with a way to order it for myself, and by ordering it, I am creating a pattern that the reader can appreciate and follow along with, even if they don't know they're following along with it, but they can, because it's what we call a verisimilitude. Our writing must be a verisimilitude, because our life is not actually lived only in a linear way. It might appear that way, but it's also totalizing also. So that's what I'm getting to.
So okay, so in the passage, correct me if I am not getting this right, but in the passage, after I sent it to you and I read the passage, I saw that I heard interspersed with the I noticed, and then the I noticed came back, which is not exactly going from the sight to the ears, and then it's coming back up to the sight again. Is that what you're kind of talking about? That it is not taking the sensation in a monotonically decreasing fashion, or whatever. I'm sorry, but I'm a maths guy, so I will use monotonically decreasing functions. But is that what you're alluding to here? Because when I started off with he noticed, he felt, he noticed, and then I went to he heard, and came back to he noticed, then went back to he heard and felt. Is that what's
okay? So the main thing that I want to communicate is that pattern that I just told you, and then basically we'll say that we want to repeat that kind of pattern over and over again. So in that way, we're always keeping the reader in touch with the external reality and the internal reality of the character. Now, we might spend more time with the internal sometimes, we might spend more time with the external sometimes, but we're always moving in and out of both all the time in order to create the total experience that we have in actual life, which is, so we put that aside for now. And now we're just going to talk about the words noticed and heard. Okay, we're just going to talk about those two words. Those are your verbs.
Mm-hmm.
Let me act out me noticing things. Okay, let me act out me hearing things. Okay. They're not tangible.
I get it.
So they're not as tangible. So hearing the sound is not as tangible as writing the sound. As the horse was upon him, its armor clanged like the shrieks of vultures.
Got it.
I'm just having fun, of course. But
Got it.
But when I understand it, so writing the sound, so sound we could say is intangible, but that's not true, right? We know that sound, you're a mathematician, we know that sounds are waves, right? We know that they're a tangible thing. Just because we don't perceive the wave, we do perceive the sound, which is a thing. So that clanging is much better than heard the clanging of the horse. I'm now in an intangible action, a neurological action, as opposed to the sound of the clang. I want my reader to hear the sound of the clang. I want my reader to smell the dung, right?
Okay.
I don't, but when I get to, so that's why, so like, go back to the onion. When I get back, he thought I'm dead. He felt at peace. Like I don't want to take the emotions are important, but I don't want to use up stuff that can be tangible with the emotions. I want to get to the intangible with those emotions. And then I want to get out of it as quickly as I can, because that's not as, and I don't want my character feeling cliches. I don't want my character feeling, they might think in cliches, and we usually do, but I don't want them feeling in cliches.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's, you actually, you have it here in a way, but you were engaged in this experiment about creating the interiority. So that's why I'm giving you this idea of like creating the onion, drive into the interiority, make it special, and then get out, right? And then back to the real world, because the reader needs to have both. They don't want to be just stuck in that interiority. Now, whether you can do it for this period of time, like let's say you wanted to show this character basically behaving in the zone. We've seen it, the movies are starting to do this now. Of course, they're working with their technology, which I think it's worth pointing out that, our technology of writing is different than movie technology. And I think that we should exploit our technology, which can actually go into the head of our characters. Like our technology allows the reader to see from the character outward, as if they are the avatar, right? Movies, we're always objectifying the experience, looking at that.
Yeah.
So it's less of that immersive experience. But they do handle this issue of like zone a little bit. If you saw, you see it in a lot of movies now, particularly action movies, where the character.
I think I'll tell you. Yeah, I'll tell you which one. Sherlock Holmes.
I was going to say Sherlock Holmes.
Robert
I was going
Downey
to say
Jr.
it. Yes, exactly.
Sorry.
With Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, where before he gets into the action scenes, he's actually visualizing exactly the sequence of punches he's going to throw at the guy. He's going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to put my hand up. I'll break his arm here.
Yeah. Precisely the movie I was going to bring up. But we see it
awesome.
too. We see it too. Like like there's something happening, and then it's like the character walks in, and there's like the dripping, the clock ticking.
Yeah.
Like those things represent that myopic focus. So I see. I see the usefulness of it, but I want to warn, as you're describing it, like right now you're describing these battle scenes that are going to be going back to the onion. Where am I? Doing everything completely exterior is not good either. We want to be moving in and out.
Yeah. Okay. So Otis, can I ask you a favor? Okay. I know we are supposed to send you only 1,500 words or less. Would you be okay with me sending you that entire battle scene of about 12,000 words? You can take a month and a half if you'd want to go through it. Would you be able to do that?
Yeah, I can. I can. You gotta work it out with Indica. They we have a relationship. If they you talk to the powers that be at Indica, and I can work for you because I don't want to rock any boats. I would like that, but I just wanted a perspective. That's
so, Arun, that's a very good point to bring up, and I have been promising Otis for the last 3 months at least. I think that there are some ideas that I have in terms of structuring and changing some of the focus of this Indica Books Writers Workshop, and I think what you have just proposed may well serve to be a forcing function for that. I'm going to share something with Hariji, and once I get his buy-in, I will roll that out. I will announce that to the larger group. And I suspect what you are suggesting here might fit in very nicely with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very cool.
I've been thinking sort of similarly, like with our group in general, it could be that we want to have maybe two different groups. One that's sort of an introductory creative writing group, and one that's kind of a creative writing workshop, maybe where people are submitting things that are of length, and we're actually reading them as a group. And everyone would be responsible for submitting something of length. We'd read them as a group and comment on them as a group. And I, of course, would manipulate the conversation like a puppet master. And there we would have it. It would be more like a real, like a graduate level creative writing workshop. So.
Yeah, I look forward to that. If that's the case.
Yeah, and it's also true if that doesn't get up and running soon, Arun, I think it's completely, I deal with my own time, and I feel, I take that responsibility. So I know that I can read quite a lot of material fast to give something broad, over it, or I can read in a detailed way. So I am able to look at that too, and can give you some feedback. It doesn't actually take me that long.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Otis. And by the way, I was telling these guys, Abhinav and all that. After that, it took me about a week, about 10 days to write that entire battle scene, and at the end of it, I was just mentally exhausted. I mean, I didn't know writing could be this exhausting, but yeah, I was just flat out. I felt like I'd run a marathon or something at the end.
I know, isn't it great?
It was. Yeah,
I know exactly what you mean. I mean, I'm sometimes there's some. It is. So my kids took violin, and the violin teacher was excellent, and she said at one point, she said that a violin player is an athlete of very small muscles. The writer is an athlete of even smaller muscles. It's like that's what we're doing. I mean, it is an action. It's not a non-action to be writing, and it is exhausting. I have sometimes come out of writing sessions like completely floored, but the intensity of the focus. I mean, just as I want to create for my reader this sort of the zone. Well, I go into that zone in order to produce that work too.
Yeah.
And want to say, I mean, I make this plea a lot, but it's like, I've trained myself, basically. I am a trained athlete. I'm not a writer. I'm a trained athlete. I sit down for 3 hours a day and I type. And I'm able to go into that zone. Developing that capacity is like training as an athlete. Do it every day. Always make it fun and rewarding. Congratulate yourself. Don't make it a burden. I mean, if you've ever been a jogger and you're like, oh, I have to go out and run 5 miles today, you know, like I do, that I don't do it, right? So make it fun, and do it regularly and build up those muscles. Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. It is a good experience, isn't it? I mean, and when you start having it, it's hard to let it go.
Yeah, I after that, I think the whole weekend I haven't written a word. My mind just shut down after that. I'm like, okay, I can't do this over the weekend.
My process now, I mean, I realize how, you know, I write and it is exhausting. I am very, very focused on my resting, and I rest, right?
Okay.
I mean, my resting does include, you know, it has to be different, like being with my kids, you know, hiking or doing whatever else I do, but it has to be that. You cannot get me to look at a screen. I'll watch a movie, but I will not do any work where I have to click around. No, I don't do any of that because I'm resting. And I'm again, going back to me being a tyrant, I'm recognizing how much of a tyrant that makes me.
But thank you so much, Otis. Thanks for the comments and the feedback.
Of course. Sritran, Ashvani, nice to see you. Sritran is also going to be producing something of length, I know. Ashvani, we know, is also going to produce a full story. So maybe we'll push forward the idea of having something that's organized more like a workshop where we're all reading each other's work. I don't know if I'm stepping on Abhinav's toes now, but I sure do like to if I can.
I'm sure.
Okay. Thank you.
So we're done with the two pieces, Otis. I'm sorry, I've kept my video off because I think I need to reboot my computer or something, because the moment I switch it on, everything just freezes.
Mm-hmm. I think we're at the end of the road here.
Good.
Ashwani, hopefully,
Perfect.
and Sricharan, something from both of you next week. Sweta, I always love reading your work. So also for us as writers, one of the very big important things for us to do is figure out how we can live our lives so that we can have more and more time for our writing. And then also more and more time for our resting.
Yes.
Very important. Okay.
Thank you. And John, for your comment, you're saying taking away bit by bit to be a budding writer, thanks for joining in. And the best way to become a writer and improve your writing is by, writing, first of all, as Otis keeps saying, write every day. And the second one is that when you write something, try and get feedback on it. Not from, just about anyone, but people that you trust, people that you think can provide you feedback on specific areas or who are qualified to provide you feedback. Again, at the end of the day, the choice to accept, incorporate that feedback or not is obviously always going to be yours. But I think getting feedback helps to sharpen our thinking a little bit. And I know I have benefited hugely. So
yeah,
there's
to keep that in mind.
Also, there's no perfect writing. As Hemingway said, no work is ever finished, only abandoned. There's no bad writing. There's only bad not writing, right? So there's no bad writing. Writing is just, it's a joy that we're able to do it. And it's, we're in a constant state of revision, I think. not just our writing, but all of us, all the time. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Otis. Thank you, everyone. And we'll put this video up on YouTube in a couple of days, and I'll share the link out. And till next week, thank you, everyone, and bye.
Thank you.